In the United States, followers of Islam have put out this doctrine that jihad is actually a spiritual matter, that it has to do with warring against the radical nature within, and it has nothing to do with violence toward other people. We had a president who was a conservative and who said Islam is a religion of peace, and I said, no, it's not. And then people called me, oh, it was a big furor. How dare you criticize George Bush because he said that. And I said, look, we elected him to be chief executive, not chief theologian. But people miss it. So radical Islamists in the United States usually cloak their true intentions in moderate language. But that's not the case in Great Britain, as Eric Stakelbeck discovered when he interviewed one of the top Muslim leaders in the UK.
Both George W. Bush and Barack Obama have declared that Islam is a religion of peace. Anjem Chowdhury begs to differ.
You can't say that Islam is a religion of peace, because Islam, it does not mean peace. Islam means Islam submission. So the Muslim is the one who submits. You know, there's a place for violence in Islam. There's a place for jihad in Islam.
Chowdhury is the leader of Islam for UK, a group recently banned in Britain under the country's counter-terrorism laws. He wants Islamic Sharia law to rule the United Kingdom and is working to make that dream a reality. He's seen here converting a 10-year-old British boy to Islam.
Islamic radicals in the United States are usually pretty savvy. They wear suits and ties. They speak, at least publicly, in moderate tones. But here in London, it's often a different story.
Anjem Chowdhury has praised the 9/11 hijackers and called for the execution of Pope Benedict. Chowdhury told CBN News his group is a nonviolent political and ideological movement that resides in the UK under a covenant of security. Yet he openly praises violent jihad.
The Quran is full of, jihad is the most talked about duty in the Quran after Tawheed, belief. Nothing else is mentioned more than the topic of fighting.
Several former members of Chowdhury's group have been arrested on terrorism charges.
A very significant number of former Al-Muhajirun people were involved in terrorist plots against this country. A number of people have actually gone to Afghanistan, joined the Taliban, and died fighting for the Taliban.
Chowdhury refuses to condemn acts of terror, including 9/11 and the July 7, 2005 London bombings, which killed 52 people.
What were your thoughts on the 7/7 bombings? Did you condemn them? Did you support them?
For the people who carried it out, it was legitimate. If you look at the will of Muhammad Siddiq Khan and Shajat Anvir, they will justify it, and they will bring many verses from the Quran and many statements to say that that's the Islamic argument. And it's a difficult Islamic argument to refute, and there are many scholars who support that argument as well.
Chowdhury says his group is merely following core Islamic teachings. He says Islam is much more than a religion.
This particular belief is more than just a religion. It's not just a spiritual belief. It is in fact an ideology which you believe in and you struggle for and you're willing even to die for because you believe in that. That is your whole life.
He seems to relish being called Great Britain's most hated man, pledging to continue his rallies, calling for the overthrow of the British system. Eric Stakelbeck, CBN News, London.
Eric is with us now. And Eric, how does Chowdhury's opinions, or how do his opinions differ from what would be considered the more moderate Muslims?
Well, Pat, one word: honesty. Anjem Chowdhury tells you exactly what he thinks, exactly what he feels. He wants Islamic Sharia law, he supports jihad, and he doesn't like Christians and Jews. And he'll tell you that to your face, Pat. It's a lot different than here in the U.S. You know, I've interviewed so many Muslim leaders, supposedly moderate Muslim leaders here in the U.S., who tell me one thing on camera, but behind the scenes, when they're talking to fellow Muslims, they say quite another thing. It's the old Yasser Arafat rule, Pat. Say one thing to a Western audience, another thing to a Muslim audience. I think our viewers should consider this interview with Anjem Chowdhury an education. He is telling you exactly what they really believe, and we need to prepare for it.
How do you think George Bush and our current president got so snookered? Maybe our president isn't snookered. Maybe he's a crypto-Muslim. I don't know. What do you think?
You know, Pat, it's tough to say. I think honestly, there's just an ignorance about Islam. If you look back to the Cold War, you look back to the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was a guy who devoured everything he could get his hands on about communism, Marxism, Stalinism, the Soviet Union. He knew the enemy. I think our political leaders today, Pat, on both sides of the aisle are completely ignorant about Islam. We had a Democratic leader just 3 years ago who didn't know the difference between Shia and Sunni. And this was a guy sitting on an Intel committee, Pat. So there's ignorance across the board. And the reality here, Pat, let's face it, it's difficult to accept. It's not a pleasant reality that Islam it has a violent streak. It's much easier to sugarcoat it and say, hey, Islam is a religion of peace. We can reason with these people. No. I sat down with Anjem Choudary for over an hour there in London, Pat, and I'll tell you, you can't reason with him. He's not going to budge from this belief, and that belief is jihad.
What do you think about political correctness? Have the American people been so seduced by political correctness that they refuse it? We won't even mention Islam now in official proclamations.
Political correctness, Pat, could end up being the death of us. I think political correctness right now is killing Europe. The reluctance, once again, to identify not only the enemy, but what the enemy believes. This is what they believe. And Pat, as Choudary said, they're getting this from the Quran. They're getting it from the Hadith. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. And it's been in there for 1,500 years, and to them, this is unchanging. It can't be changed. What we need is some Muslims. We can't do it. Some Muslims have to step up, look at the Quran, and say, hey, we have to bring this up to date to the 21st century. It's not the 7th century anymore. We need to bring it into the modern day. We need to strike these verses about jihad and try to translate in a way that it doesn't apply to the present day. That's a very, very tall order, Pat. As you know, that's what we need. I don't know that we'll get it.
Eric, I don't think we will either, but it looks like this violent confrontation is coming up all around the world, and there's no escaping. We've just got to be strong and fight these things where we can. But Eric Stakelbeck, great work. Keep it up. We appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Pat.
Boy, that naive intellectualism that says surely we can sit down and reason together is going to be our nemesis.
I've been on a sort of debate with a Muslim college student who didn't have a clue about what the Islam taught, didn't have a clue about what the Quran said, nothing. But she was, well, I'm a Muslim, yeah, oh, sure. And it's this religion of peace stuff. But they don't understand what Muhammad taught. It's in the Quran, in the very essence of their religion, and it really, as I've said before, it's not so much a religion as an all-embracing political system, which is what this Choudary said. It's an all-embracing that consumes you.
Let him who has ears hear, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, coming up.